Okay, I'm back again with Fiona McGlynn, at this point in time, a year three astrological apprenticeship student at AstroVedicAstrology.com. And she's joining me on this series, talking about the planets for each ascendant. We've already done Venus for a Libra ascendant. And today we're going to talk about Mars for a Libra ascendant. So,
yes,
you know the pattern of how things we've been looking at. So when you think about Mars ruling the second house and the seventh house for a Libra ascendant, generally speaking, how does Mars work for a Libra ascendant?
well, I think this is also interesting, Ryan, because when you just, as a student, look at this, first of all, you're like, well, 2 and 7, okay, and 7 is an angle. Mars is a malefic planet, so we're thinking, we're beginning to be lulled into this sense of, okay, good, this is a bit of direction, a bit of action, liking to see this here. But then we've got to really take caution there and remember that malefics are great when they're ruling angles if they're linked also with ruling a trine. Like that's a really, really important clause of that idea.
Yes.
And here we find ourselves not in that situation at all. So we've got Mars ruling 7th, yay, but actually it's also ruling the 2nd, which is a neutral house. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be led by the more dominant house, and you know, Mars with 7, you're going to think this is dominant enough to be the leader here.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit about this, is that both of these are Marika numbers, right? Or Marika houses that...
Yeah, they are related to this idea of sort of death and a little bit of destruction there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've got what we thought was maybe like a really strong combination looking perhaps a bit unbalanced here of the 2 and the 7. So let's think a little bit about Mars energy. We know is... it's energetic, it's dynamic, it's got this instinct to take action. Mm-hmm. And here we see it happening in the 7th in Aries, a sign that's also going to foster that sense of, going on your own and taking the leadership and initiating things. Mm-hmm. So in our relationship for the Libra ascendants with others, that's what 7 is going to represent, is all those others out there, the exact opposite end of the zodiac, looking across from the first house. So our relationships with others could have this slightly explosive Mars energy element to it. But where it maybe gets a little more unhappy is that the 2nd house is related to speech. Mm-hmm. Right? And so here we have Mars already impulsive and can be explosive or frustrated sometimes, linked with the house related to speech, meaning that this is probably going to come out of the mouth, and maybe coming out a little unfiltered. So this could have an impact on relationships. Mm-hmm. And why this is important is because, of course, 2nd house is all about resources and responsibilities. And naturally, we're going to see Libra ascendant is going to link together the resource generation, the managing of resources. They're going to do that with others or through others. It's just drawn together, and that goes really well with our idea of Libras and trade. It's just so natural that that's how that's going to work. But perhaps we've got to be aware that for a Libra ascendant, there's a risk here that Mars is not necessarily being checked, and can lead to be a bit explosive if it's not supported or out of balance or not in the best way, and that could be damaging to relationships and could be damaging to finances. So it's got a double-edged sword, maybe leaning slightly towards more one of those edges, given the Marika things. But I'd love to hear how strongly you feel that impacts on those 2 and 7.
Well, those are wonderful points, and I wasn't even thinking about bringing up the Marika idea, but it's beautiful that you did, because people don't really necessarily, well, maybe if you know a Libra ascendant well enough, people don't necessarily associate Libra with things like aggression or with things like war or with things like taking advantage of other people. But when we look at Vedic myth, the avatar of Venus, if I remember correctly, is committed himself to, I think, going around the world something like over 20 times to kill all these unjust kings, right? And there are plenty of examples of politicians and people really heavily involved in things like war who are Libra ascendants. And it's because of this, what you mentioned, the second and seventh rulership of Mars for Libra ascendant, because it brings in more of this aggression. That now the issue with it is it does naturally lean a little more towards difficulty. But you mentioned, which is good, that the second house is a neutral house. Okay, so it's not necessarily horrible, terrible yet, but that's why when you're looking at a chart for Libra ascendant, you need to see what kind of situation is Mars in. Where is it placed? What house is it in? What are the Logitati of Ashta's impact in it? What is its Shadbala? Because that will give you a greater sense of just how difficult can this Mars be for a Libra ascendant. We have to remember when we think about Libra, if you're looking at a Libra's chart, Mars is going to be debilitated in the 10th house, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mars is going to be exalted in the 4th house. Okay.
Yep.
And what's also fascinating, we'll get to this when we talk about Saturn, is that Saturn is exalted in the 1st house for Libra ascendant. So this is actually showing that while Libras can be kind and caring and nurturing and have the ability to anticipate the needs of others, because there's such a potential for something like Saturn or Mars to take hold within an angle and be very strong, they are going to have this natural difficult side. However, when you're involved in business, when you're involved in trade, when you're involved in politics, when you're involved in trying to care for and take care of an economy much larger than your own, that cruel part of them has to be there. Otherwise,
I think you're right. It's important.
Yeah. Otherwise, the politician gets walked all over. The king or queen gets walked all over. So the fine line that we're talking about balancing there is seeing that, yes, Mars can be a difficult planet for a Libra ascendant, specifically related to partners, specifically related to early childhood, specifically related to managing one's resources well. But that Martian energy and that Saturnine energy is necessary for them to be successful in fulfilling whatever their dharma might be within the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could only imagine what would happen if they didn't have that.
Right.
Marshmallow land. So, they need that edge. And I think there's so many things to pick up on. But one of them is that not only is Saturn exalted in the 1st house, but that means it's debilitated in the 7th house that we're speaking of. So Saturn's also not tempering Mars in that 7th house. So, yes. Allowing it to be that more impulsive energy. So we've got that going on. Should we have a little chat about exaltation?
Yes, yeah, let's go ahead. Yeah, we want to save the Saturn for the Saturn talk. I didn't mean to derail us, but so when we think about Mars being exalted in the 10th, let's start with Mars being debilitated in the 10th and exalted in the 4th. So when we tune into Mars debilitated in the 10th, the 2nd and 7th Lord being debilitated in the 10th, what does that bring up for you?
Yeah, I think, again, we're linking here. We've talked about that the finances are going to involve partners, and now we're talking about being debilitated in the 10th house, where activity is taking place, where we've got status, where we're seen by others. So I think, again, there's this risk that as Mars is debilitated there, people are going to see any of these verbalizations that are non-helpful. They're going to happen in this public arena. Right. And I think, I'm looking for your feedback here, but is part of what makes Mars debilitated over there for a Libra ascendant, or what's going on a little bit there, is that Mars is going to be a bit too rigid of holding on to the right and the wrong in this adaptable kind of Cancer space. Is that what's
right? I wouldn't say it's not too rigid. That's more of a Saturn quality. I would say that, when we think about Mars being debilitated in the 10th, it's trying to push agendas that are, say, out of sync with what is really needed, because if we refer back to the previous talk with Venus for a Libra ascendant, Venus, the ascendant Lord, is exalted in the 6th, which is that sign of service and work and being essentially for others. And that's also why Saturn is exalted in the 1st house for Libra, because it's meant to put that hard work of Saturn for other people in a way, right? And so when you take that Mars and stick in the 10th and it's debilitated, they can get in their mind, just like many politicians do, their own agenda, and that's all they can see is their agenda, and they just pick the fights that aren't worth picking. What happens? Their home suffers. Mars, it should be exalted in the 4th house. Their land suffers. The kingdom that they're meant to rule over suffers because they're pushing an agenda that is not necessarily for the greater good, right? Mm-hmm. That's what it boils down to, because the 10th house often deals with the public and the greater good, and sort of the visible actions we take that affect more people around us.
Yeah. So then we're hoping to get the balance then from being exalted over in Capricorn, where Mars is really put to the pressure of solving the problems and being ingenious with like pressure and limited resources.
Right.
But that brings out the best in Mars. And are we saying then that that this is happening in the 4th house? So that for that sense of, we're talking about the risk of pushing one's own agenda that's out of sync with what people need. So in the 4th house, actually the benefit for Mars is that it's able to tap into the inner emotional core of the 4th house. Is that? Yeah.
And they're able, Mars, not everyone knows this, but just like the moon is a representation of the mother, Mars is also a representation of the mother. And so you want to have a fierce mother to protect you, right? Yeah. You want the mother to be able to, breastfeed you and bring you to sleep and all those sorts of things. But you also want the one that when there's danger around, the tamasic energy, that mother can come forth like that lion or Durga and protect, protect the land, the property, the home, the heart, the emotional core, right? But Libra has to do it in a very practical way because it's happening in Capricorn.
Yeah.
Right. Which again, we know is important, this whole Saturnine energy, because Saturn is exalted in the first for a Libra ascendant. So the Libras have to ride this fine line between, taking care of others, nurturing others, but also being able to fiercely protect them and be logical about it and think about the greater good of, again, this idea of the home, the heart, the emotions, 4th house things, rather than trying to really push their agenda neurotically or in an overcompensated fashion, if that Mars would say have a similar action of being in the 10th house and debilitated.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really bringing to my attention how important Mars is for Venus. For Libra. For Libra, for Libra. But, and when we think about this idea of Mars ruling the 2nd and the 7th, so you mentioned it, 2nd and 7th Lord being debilitated in the 10th, often that can contribute to scandal, right? Exactly.
Scandal problems coming up, very kind of difficult issues with Martian-related things. And Mars is also about passion, just like Venus is. It's another side of it. But then when we take the 2nd and 7th and we stick it in Capricorn in the 4th and make it exalted, again, what's it showing? It's showing that using that logic, that ingenuity, that ingenious idea that you mentioned, for the good of supporting a person's inner emotional needs, that is where Mars excels. And then prosperity comes. And then exchange is better, right? The whole Libran idea of exchange and trade, that becomes better because there's more logic around it. There's more a sense of realism around it. And they're willing to do the hard work to make it happen versus just spouting off whatever's on their mind and causing more wars or problems and things of this nature.
Yeah. I look forward to, I think I can investigate that a lot more. Mars being exalted in the 4th house.
Yeah. Well, you do a video on it and send it and I'll put it on the channel. But no, Libra is a very powerful ascendant.
Yeah.
It's a very, Leo is wonderful in regards to its regalness and nobleness and the qualities that it has for benefiting the culture. But there's something about Libra that kind of shows this idea of, we're putting, in a sense, nobility aside, and we're saying what really needs to happen here in the Venetian fashion of care and nurturing, but what also really needs to happen in regards to protection and logic. I think Libra really embodies this. It just seems to me that the Libra could be very successful in the world because of those kinds of qualities that they're able to tap into.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, any final thoughts on Mars for a Libra ascendant?
No, that is great. I've got lots of thoughts from our conversation. I'm looking forward to contemplating them more.
Okay. All right. Good. And those of you tuning in at home, if you have questions about this, go ahead and you can put them on the comments, and hopefully I will encourage Fiona to check those and see what she can type in to help us work through some of this stuff. So,
yeah, encourage my learning. Excellent.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for being here again, Fiona.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay.